Okay, so let's talk about Title III, which was the replacement to the Bilingual Education Act, and it was part of the No Child Left Behind, which was started in 2001 by President Bush. And it replaced the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was last reauthorized by President Clinton in 1994. So this new educational plan attempted to establish an accountability system in response to a number of growing educational issues at the time having to do with language minority students. So, for example, it included the language minority students' underachievement, their high dropout rates, teachers' low expectations of these students, and also their need to be annually assessed and their performance to be monitored each year. So for these reasons and others, there's actually very little opposition from Republicans or Democrats when it was put into place. So this new law reinstated a focus towards the English-only instruction. And while bilingual education programs could still apply for funding, there was much more financial support available for English-only programs than for bilingual education programs. And it stated that programs containing ELLs needed to teach both English and academic content. And the students' English language proficiency would be assessed every year on state assessments that incorporated these measurable objectives that were put into place for students at every grade level. So the positive aspects to NCLB were that ELL students were being provided with academic standards that would try and address some of the issues that were at stake at that time, right? So the low expectations, and also it clarified the benchmarks that would address sort of that this population needed to achieve. This was the first time that an Education Act had done this, right? Had put in standards that everybody had to meet in order to pass to the next level. And that was sort of, the idea behind that was very beneficial. We do need an accountability system of some sort. Also, the other positive thing was that due to the fact that ELLs were being included in that annual assessment, right, the districts and the schools were now being forced to pay attention to ELLs and were being held to responsible for their performance and their progress every year, which hadn't been the case beforehand. However, there were also some negative aspects to NCLB, as you are probably very well know. NCLB has a lot of criticism at this point in the educational domain. So when we think about ELLs in NCLB, one of the sort of negatives is that it ended federal recognition and support for bilingualism and bilingual education, because the shift of focus was towards English, and now there were assessments that were tracking English language and proficiency. It really did not provide a lot of support for bilingual education programs anymore. Now people wanted to place their children into programs that focused on English because they knew that these assessments were being given every year and had a lot of detrimental effects. Also, it encouraged the ELL students to be moved into mainstream classrooms as quickly as possible, and it also put a lot of unrealistic expectations onto students because of the over-reliance on high-stakes testing and the punishment-based system. So in NCLB, if a school does not show improvement, or if the school goes from a grade of A to B or C, the federal government withholds money from that district, or the district withholds money from that school, which obviously does not help students to do better because there are less resources, less money for training for personnel, etc., etc. So the punishment-based system that is tied to the accountability system put into place really has made it very difficult for schools in this era. Then when we think about the ELLs, we know that ELLs are grouped together But it's problematic because they come with very, very different backgrounds. Different languages that they speak, they have different proficiency levels in English, different experiences and backgrounds with English. They have different needs. Their ages are different, and so to put them into a group and as sort of, as all the same is problematic because they really are not. They're also held to the same achievement standards as English speakers because they're tested in English, which is a language that they're still trying to learn, and their scores, they're being held accountable for their scores on the tests. Moreover, ELLs that leave the ESOL program are not tracked anymore. So there's no information about how that ELL is doing after they've been in that ESOL program. Do they continue to do well? Have they been prepared adequately to perform in the mainstream classroom without any sort of ESOL assistance? Okay, and then President Obama reauthorized NCLB, and he added a component to it called Race to the Top, which ended up strengthening or actually promoting the assessment and accountability system that everybody criticizes about NCLB. So with his Race to the Top program, what he intended to do was to put aside $4.3 billion in stimulus funding that districts and schools could apply for. And so that stimulus funding is there to try and provide more money to schools to help their resources, personnel, and all those other things. But there are several different components that schools have to align with in order to receive that funding, and many of those things reinforce that assessment piece. So in the end, NCLB continues to be very a very punishment-based system, and has a lot of problems with the assessment portion to do with ELLs, especially because these assessments are in English. We're going to talk a little bit more about assessments later on in the next couple of sessions, and really get into the details around the problematic aspects of assessment in English for ELLs.